Get the flex on. Oh, flex on. Yes. Okay. Scoot. Oh. Moving the backdrop, moving it, twisting it around. We're getting crazy. Good morning, polar bear cubs, kids, Colt? None of those work. I'll figure it out later. Writing is hard work. And I mean, it's an assload of hard work. Over the course of your writing career, you're going to have failed manuscripts, you're going to meet asshole editors, you're going to trust the wrong people, and you're going to kiss the ass of every diarrhea-prone publicist that you could possibly find. You're going to make a lot of mistakes, is what I'm trying to say. And that's fine. Making mistakes is part of the business. Over the course of the last 8 years that I've been writing, I've made a ton of mistakes, and those mistakes have given way to lessons. Today, I'm going to share with you the 5 most important lessons that I've learned from being an author. I decided I wanted to be an author in 2011 in a Walmart bathroom. I was sitting on the floor, not doing my job, avoiding the responsibilities. I'd cleaned one bathroom and it was disgusting, and I didn't want to venture out and see what the other 5 looked like. So I sat down, and I had been kicking around this idea for this story for a long time that I really wanted to work on. It was about this family called the McAllisters, and they had this national treasure. They lived in this big-ass colonial mansion in the eastern U.S., and it was about the treasure hunter who finds this treasure. And I spent 2 or 3 hours sitting down in this bathroom, poring over character ideas, locations, anything that I could shoehorn in to make this story work. And when I finally decided that I was done, I got up and I left to go do my work. And funnily enough, I didn't touch that story again for a number of months. I had struck an interest in writing and began writing short stories and just little poetry deals and little, just little one-off pieces that most of them never saw the light of day. But I realized then that I wanted to be an author. That was going to be my goal. And in realizing this, it brought me to a new job. And at this new job, I was surrounded by people who were incredibly thoughtful and creative, and they jived with the energy that I was bringing to the table. And one of them invited me to play this tabletop RPG called World of Darkness. And so she gave me all the information for creating a character, sent me a bunch of PDFs, gave me a bunch of research and homework. And so I started pouring through it and created the first character that I grew an attachment to. Her name is Annabelle. And she was this golem that was created by a crazy alchemist. And her whole purpose in the game was going to be to find her soul, a human soul, that she could infuse into her body and regain her true humanity. As I began creating this character, though, I just poured into backstory and gave her all this lore, and I found myself infatuated with the idea of this character. And it became the first character I had ever made that I truly fell in love with. Everything about her was amazing to me. It set the building blocks for what would eventually become the story that I'm writing today. And that taught me the first lesson that I learned. One of the most important aspects of writing is paying attention to everything. I mean, from social interactions to political situations, the way that different nations operate, even down to the small stuff like what people eat, the habits that we create for ourselves, the way we react to different things, and everybody reacts differently. And your interests apply to this almost tenfold. Some of my biggest interests are like black magic, the occult, religion, voodoo, stuff like that. And And I have, alchemy is a huge one. And all of these feed into the characters I create, the worlds that I've built, and all of the other stuff that I'm working on in my story to make it feel more real. And it's a really important aspect of writing is when what you write doesn't feel real, when it doesn't have something to connect it to the reader, it's not as realistic, it's not as easy to connect with, obviously. And that's a big aspect of writing, especially in various genres. Horror, the reason people connect with horror so well is because there's something that we can see inside of ourselves, inside of the main character or a support character or the monster in some cases. It's a big aspect of being an author. To that end, shortly after creating Annabelle, I look back on the Treasure Hunter novel. And I started working on it. This was some number of months later. And while I was working on this novel, I began talking to a friend of mine who I had romantic feelings for, that I had met in high school. And we began spending a lot of time together, and she moved to Oregon, and I went to go visit her. And then when I returned, we had a falling out, and it kind of broke my heart a little bit because I was expecting something out of the relationship that wasn't there. And that fed into and eventually taught me the next big lesson that I'd learn about writing. The Darling Bones was my very first full-length novel, and the main character, Aiden Kurt, was an avatar for all of the kind of pain and hopelessness and loss that I was feeling at the time. And I pulled from every heartbreak that I had ever experienced when I was creating this character. And as I built through and made him what he is today, I realized that he was kind of a bummer, just as a whole. And as I was working through and, editing and whatnot, I worked tirelessly on the Darling Bones because I wanted my readers to feel that same pain that I was feeling at the time. And Aiden was the method of translation, I guess you could say. As I built this character in this world, in this story, he evolved as my pain evolved. And that's the important part of what I'm trying to say here. When I started the Darling Bones, I was very sad. I was hopeless. I was lonely. And by the end of it, tirelessly working on it for months and months and months. I think it was like a little over a year. It was like 15 months or something like that I was writing the Darling Bones. He evolved as a character, and the story evolved because it became less about my heartbreak and more about telling a story and imparting something meaningful into the mind of the reader, the life of the reader. And that's an important aspect of being an author. Because if you don't have a story to tell, then your writing will suffer. If you don't have a reason to write what you're writing, it will likely suffer. And that's not to say that you can't just enjoy writing nonsense for fun. I mean, plenty of bestsellers currently do that. Look at Stephanie Meyer. Anyway, in regards to writing The Darling Bones, when I finished it, I went to the editing process. And I was still a young writer. I didn't understand a very important lesson about editing and writing. Because I spent 28 straight days out of the 31 days in March of 2013 editing the book. Which was fine for like a first pass read through, then to fix like the big huge mistakes. But I collectively slept maybe 20 minutes a day during this course of time, to the point where even my doctor was like pissed because I was hurting myself to get this book done. And when the book finally, at the end of the month, when I was finally finished with the book, I rejoiced and threw a huge party and released the book just in the nick of time because I wanted it to release on my birthday that year. So I threw this big party, and had a lot of fun with my friends, and set my sights on my next novel, putting The Darling Bones kind of on the back burner, not really thinking about it a whole lot, having published it, pitched it to a few of the local joints like bookstores and the Commerce Center, Chamber of Commerce, excuse me, and a few other, local places around town that would sell my book. And I began working on the next big project, the next project, the next frogget. I began working on the next project, Mean Shadows, which was a different beast altogether. When I began Mean Shadows, I set out to do it in a radically different way than I had done The Darling Bones, because the nature of the book was radically different. Mean Shadows, at its end, was 26 short stories that all spanned different genres, different points of time in my universe. And all of those genres, in order to write them effectively, I was consuming media at a rate that I don't think I've ever replicated since. Every hour of every day that I wasn't at work or working on Mean Shadows itself, I was watching TV, I was playing video games, I was listening to music, I was reading books, I was doing anything that I could to consume media, to consume new stories, and give me new ideas, and to give me a perspective shift. And that's a really important part of being an author. Stephen King said, I'm paraphrasing because I don't have like the image up anywhere, but he said, good authors are do two things often. They read a lot and they write a lot. And it's true. In order to be a good writer, you need to consume a lot of writing, consume a lot of stories, so you can learn and you can adapt and you can take the things you like and evolve them into your own specific style. And you also need to write a lot, because you write one or two things a year, you're going to grow and you will get better, but you're not going to do it quickly. And that's an important aspect, especially with how saturated the author market is. I mean, you can look online anywhere and find hundreds, if not thousands, of stories that are subpar and sad and not written well, because the people just think that we can jump into this avenue, into this market, and do it and make a bunch of money, and they get to live this fancy, fun life. But like I said at the beginning of this video, writing is a lot of hard work, and it is a lot of time. But it's time that's worth it. Because if you look at the authors and the storytellers that are big inspirations to you, your favorites, mine specifically are Fairy Tale, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, the Lord of the Rings series, The Hobbit, so J.R.R. Tolkien, Frank Peretti, Dean Koontz, Ted Dekker, Stephen King, Chuck Palahniuk, Haruki Murakami. I mean, I was looking into all of these different authors and creators. Coheed and Cambria, the band, their lead singer Claudio writes a story called The Amory Wars, and this whole concept follows their band, and it's an obsession of mine, honestly. It's an important aspect of writing, is studying and learning and adapting the things that you learn for your own personal work. So in doing this with Mean Shadows, I finished the book, and I was extremely proud of what I had done. And it was a Christmas present to my friends. This is the reason I started writing it. And so each of the 26 stories were dedicated to a friend, a family member, a mentor in my life that had given me something over the course of my life that I wanted to kind of pay back the feeling that they had given me, the lessons that they had taught me, so on and so forth. So Christmas came around. I finished editing the book in 2 months, and under another extremely short editing time period. This one was 2 months so that I could sleep at least a little bit more, under orders from my doctor. And when Christmas passed and my friends all had their books, my family all had their books, the new year came around and I looked back on Mean Shadows and The Darling Bones for the first time. The Darling Bones for the first time for a couple years since its publication. And I questioned if it would stand up to the great stories that had inspired it. The great songs, the movies, the video games, whatever, I thought back and I came to the conclusion that those stories that I had written in Mean Shadows and then the entirety of the Darling Bones, they weren't good enough because I didn't treat them with the respect that I should have. And by that, I mean your work is part of you. And if you're not giving 100% to the story that you have, then you're not being honest with yourself and you're not being honest with your eventual readers, your prospective fan base that you're trying to achieve. They're going to see through it. And I'm not saying write so that you can please your fans. Write to please yourself, but write in a way that you can have other people feel something when they read the story. Write so that other people can adapt and understand what you're saying. Write with purpose. And that was an issue that I struggled with in the Darling Bones because I had a purpose, I had a meaning, but because I cut so many corners with editing and time limits and changing the way the story was so that I could make it simple, I lost a lot of the life of that story. So, at the beginning of 2017, I began looking back on Mean Shadows and the Darling Bones specifically, with a almost murderous intent in my eyes, because I was about to do the thing that I was so afraid of doing, and I was going to kill my little baby of a book because I needed to. Which is why you can't find the Darling Bones or Mean Shadows available anywhere online right now, because I took them down in the wake of learning the next lesson. The Darling Bones, as it came out, was a mess. It was poor grammar, misspelled words, giant plot holes that had no endings. There were no endings planned for them. It was a nightmare. And I was just too close to the big picture to really understand that that's what it was. And it's a big lesson that any writer worth their weight will tell you never to cut corners by dodging a professional editor. There are things you can kind of fudge. I don't recommend doing it on anything, because if you half-ass anything about your book, like I said, you're being dishonest with yourself. And that was a big problem with the Darling Bones specifically. Mean Shadows was much better, but the Darling Bones was still a huge problem because it was a mess. It was formatted poorly, the story was hard to engage with, and there were a lot of issues with it. And pretty much the only thing I did right in the Darling Bones is that I hired an amazing editor, or an amazing cover artist to make the cover for the book. So I went back to the drawing board and I began re-editing the Darling Bones. From the ground up, I took every piece of it apart and looked at the story overall and created the story that I wanted to tell. I changed the way characters interacted. I changed so many things about it, and when it was done, it was still the same story, but it was told in a much, much better light. And then I realized that if I wanted to meet these publication deadlines and all of this stuff, I wasn't going to be able to get a professional editor. So I had to make the difficult decision, because I'm such a goal-oriented and deadline-oriented person, I had to sacrifice meeting a deadline to wait and get the book edited and do it right. Which is why, like I said, you cannot find the Darling Bones or Mean Shadows on any site online right now. I mean, there might be a couple, like, way out there, a couple copies that people just try to resell. Maybe someone ripped the whole ebook and posted on Wattpad or something, I don't know. But the official sales routes have all been closed for now, because it is that important that you get a professional editor. You're going to make a lot of mistakes over the course of your writing career. And that's fine. That's to be expected. But if you don't learn from those mistakes, you're going to spend the rest of your career writing the same book over and over again and never reaching a conclusion, never reaching the end of these stories you want to tell. And I think there's no worse fate for a writer, for a creative person, than to write the same thing over and over and over again because you can't be happy with it. And I realized this and made the necessary cuts. I made the necessary changes because I didn't want to have to keep relearning the same lesson over and over and over again. It's an important thing to keep in mind, and it's important that you admit to yourself when you can do better. Because you can always do better, but don't obsess over it. That's why we have editors. That's why we have beta readers. That's why we have extra people outside of ourselves that will help us with publishing the novel, with editing the novel, with, you know, bouncing story ideas off of, even in the early stages of creating a new story. You should surround yourself with people who are willing and honest with you, who are willing to listen to you bitch about you can't figure out how the story arc should go, who are willing to listen to you talk about how excited you are because you've created this new monster and it's so cool. And you also need people who are going to be real and honest with you. And when you publish your book that hasn't been professionally edited, that hasn't barely been edited by more than you, that your friend's gonna throw it in your face and say, this looks like shit and you need to fix it. You're not gonna go anywhere with this. It's really important that you have those people. Because if you don't have someone in your life that's going to call you on that shit, you're not gonna grow. You're not gonna grow nearly as fast, at least. But don't be too hard on yourself. That brings me to the final lesson. Ask anybody who knows me. I'm not a healthy person. I drink a lot of energy drinks. I drink a lot of soda. I eat like garbage. My sleeping schedule is so erratic. I sleep for 2 hours one night and 17 the next. I don't take care of myself, and I am a lot better than I used to be. But when I was writing The Darling Bones, I was in the worst shape I probably have ever been. I was eating ramen noodles and drinking Dr. Pepper and Red Bull and smoking cigarettes and, you know, the whole 9 yards. And it was just, I was not in a good place. And that is something that is really important about being an author that you need to keep in mind. Take care of yourself. Because if you don't, you're not going to live long enough to write anything else. But more importantly, you're not going to be in the state of mind, in the state that you need to be in to write your best right now. It's an undersold thing, especially in our society, you know, where we can get a soda for $1, but it costs $3 to buy a bottle of water. You know, there's 1,000 options for fast food, and there's still 1,000 options to make food, but it takes a lot more time to cook all the food for yourself, you know? And sleeping, for me at least, it's a whole lot better for me to, in my head, I get a lot more done when I stay up until 5 in the morning and then wake up at 1 p.m. and then just go right to work and then get off work and do the same thing over and over again. But when you break it down, you're really not getting much more done because you're not operating at the best you can operate. You're not thinking with the sharpest mind you could think with. And it's about being a work in progress. You are, no matter where you're at in life, you are as a person, you're not finished yet. You're still growing, you're still learning, and that's never going to stop. And that's good, and it's good. That's something to be celebrated. Because that means your stories are never going to stop either. The more life you live, the more you will want to write. So take care of yourself. Go outside, visit your friends, make new friends, go have lunch with your girlfriend, you know, stay in with your family. Whatever it is that you have that you should do for the betterment of your physical, spiritual, and mental state, you should always do those things. Make those things a priority. Don't kill yourself every day just to write a couple hundred more words at the end of your night. It's not worth it. Because the next morning you can get up and you'll write 2,200 words instead of your regular 2,000. Whatever the case may be, it's really important that you stay healthy, because the longer you stay healthy, the longer you're going to be here for us to enjoy what you're creating. And really, at the end of the day, isn't that your goal anyway? Isn't that your dream? Your words are going to last a lot longer than you are. But make sure that they reflect something and someone who is healthy and happy and okay. I don't think there's anything more important about writing than making sure that we're writing with good intent in our minds. Even if you write something mean and bad, and you write an evil character who's just a big piece of shit, you're going to be able to do that a lot better after a plate full of vegetables and some water than you will after 6 Red Bulls and a 72-hour bender. Take it from the guy who's lived it and done it all. Trust me. So, after you're done writing today, go outside, go for a bike ride, go for a walk. Download Pokemon Go and go hit some Pokestops and catch 1,000 Rattatas. Whatever your method of getting out and getting active is, it is really important that you balance those things with your work. Because if you have too much of one, not enough of the other is going to kill you. And it doesn't matter which way that goes. Thank you so much for listening to me talk for a handful of minutes like this today. I am overflowing and dripping with gratitude that you would take time out of your busy day to spend with me and to listen to me talk. I'm sorry this video is a little late. I'm trying to stick to a Tuesday schedule. I had to make a trip out of town this early this week, so I couldn't get the video uploaded when I wanted it to. But if you're interested in a bit more in-depth talk about what I went over today about these 5 lessons, be sure to click the link in the description. I have a link to my blog where I'm posting a sister blog post that is supposed to complement this video. I'm just kind of going a little bit more in depth about the nature of The Darling Bones and Mean Shadows, my first 2 novels, and then how my work has changed and how it's grown, as well as a little bit more information on how I learned these 5 lessons and some other things that you should probably keep in mind as you start your journey to be a writer. Anyway, if you like the music, please, there's another link in the description for my buddy. He makes amazing music and he's doing a lot of really cool stuff right now. And I hope you will take time to show him some love too. I appreciate that you've come here, so let's spread some more love around. I'll see you next Tuesday for the next video, and I'll be back on schedule this time. Don't you worry your little head if you were worried at all. Anyway, thank you so much. I am Alva Tobias. This is my cool ass new hat. You can also call me the Polar Bear King, and I will see you next weekend. Until then, remember, life is not meant to be awful. This is vape though.